Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes, and fresh back from the Serengeti is my colleague and traveller of the world, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you, Ken?
I am feeling very refreshed, Rory, and it's just brings into my awareness again how important breaks are for us. You know, we need to have that self-care, that time away that we can recharge our batteries, and I certainly feel very recharged and very excited for all of the new plans that we have in store for Counselling Tutor.
Yeah, we've got some really interesting plans, and some of those you'll be seeing in our Facebook page in the next few weeks. And if you don't know where our Facebook page is, you can go into Facebook and just put in Counselling Tutor and you'll find us. It's a closed group, so you have to knock on the door. We let you in, and we have over 7,000 people in the group, all interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. Or you can go to our mother page at www.counsellingtutor.com. Remember, there's two L's in counselling. We spell it in the UK British English way. And if you click on that web page, apart from finding our podcast archive, you can click on the right-hand side and enter the Facebook group there. And that's where we announce a lot of our new ideas. And we've got some really good new ideas going forward, haven't we, Kim?
We have indeed. And we have a action-packed, if action is the right word, episode today. We're going to be kicking off episode 43. We're going to be speaking about awarding bodies. And this is really timeous, I guess, here in the UK at the moment. Many are preparing for assignments. Some are preparing for their final portfolios, which need to be submitted at the end of their training. And different awarding bodies have different requirements, and we're going to be examining those today. Maybe you're considering studying and you're wondering which awarding body you should be going with. Well, today, those questions will at least be debated, if not maybe answered for you. Then Theory with Rory is a new kid on the block, Rory. You're looking at an interesting theory, and that is EDMR, and that is eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. Mouthful.
Yeah, and I've been voicing the segments about the theory, and I've been getting the letters back to front. EMDR, eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing. It's the recommended approach by the National Health Service here in the UK for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm going to be just doing a little overview of this new and really interesting therapy and just how it works. So stay tuned for that, because it's really fascinating. And as I say, it's one of those research-based therapies that the research tells us that works.
And we're going to be closing off episode 43 by looking at our good friend challenge. Challenge within your counselling room. You're working with a client. How do you challenge? Is challenge appropriate? And I was speaking to a colleague only recently on some CPD that I was doing, and the colleague was very purely person-centered. And it was this colleague's opinion that challenge has no place in person-centered therapy. So we're going to debate that, and we're going to kind of examine that and see what that brings up for you. But right to the beginning, speaking about those awarding bodies, it might be assignment time, it might be portfolio time, you might be considering studying. Which awarding body, Rory? Talk us through them. What are they?
Right, okay, well, yes, it's a bit of a dog's dinner, to be honest, Ken. I can see Ken laughing at the other end of the studio screen. We'll talk about here in the UK and a little bit about our friends in Scotland. They're slightly different. But here in the UK, there are awarding bodies, and they are exam boards, for want of a better reason. And they are independent businesses set up to provide awarding bodies certificates and the specifications of courses. So when you go and choose a course, it's a good bet that there's the course has been written by one of these organisations, which are businesses, and the syllabus has to be approved by Ofqual, which is the government, and they are the people who oversee qualifications, certainly in what we call further education, so up to level 4 in private training providers and colleges. So people usually enter at level 2. There are level 1s, but there's very few level. I did a level 1 many years ago, but now it's level 2, and a level 2 roughly is the equivalent to doing a GCSE here in the UK. So, or certainly here in England, it's slightly different in Scotland, but here in England, it's equivalent to doing a level 2, and then most people would go on to do a level 3, which again, in England is the equivalent to doing a level 3, or I think in Scotland it's Highers. They call it Highers, and that's equivalent to A levels. And then after that, you go to level 4, which is equivalent to the first year of a foundation degree. It's the foundation year of a degree. Now, this is where it gets a bit complicated. Okay, so on the Facebook page, there's been lots of people saying, well, I've got a level 5 qualification. You're not qualified until you do level 5. That's not true. Okay, if you have a level 4 diploma in counselling by CPCAB or COSCA, or which is the Scottish awarding bodies, or ABC or AIM, or any of these businesses that provide qualifications, you are a qualified counsellor. End of story. There's no debate about it. You may be at the beginning of your career, but you're a qualified counsellor. Now, this is where it gets complicated. If you go to university, you could do a level 4 certificate in counselling skills, but when you come to the end of it, you are not a counsellor. And I've had this where people have said, well, I've done a level 4 certificate in counselling skills at a uni. And I've said, yeah, but you're not a counsellor. You've got basically an enhanced counselling skills qualification. It doesn't allow you to be a counsellor. So here's my top tip. If you're unsure, if you're moving from level 3 to level 4, check with the BACP, British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, or COSCA if you're in Scotland, about which qualifications they will accept to become members. This is the crucial thing. This is the crucial thing. You can have, I've had people who've got master's degrees in counselling, only to discover that they can't practice as a counsellor because the contact hours that you have between yourself and your clients and the supervised hours that oversee that contact isn't enough. So I would suggest that you speak with either the ethical bodies, ABC, or the Counselling Society. They will tell you what they will accept, and that should guide you. Now, some people think, should I go to a college or a private training provider and do a level 4, or should I just hop from level 3 to level 5? Well, that is only something you can decide. But the crucial thing in whatever you decide to do is to make sure that the hours, there's a minimum, an absolute minimum of 100 contact hours with clients, and they're supervised. Without that, then it doesn't matter what bit of paper you've got, you cannot join an ethical body, and therefore you're virtually unemployable.
Wow, it is. It's tricky ground to walk on, and when you're making your decisions, I would suggest doing what Rory has said and contact the BACP. They have a student division, and they'll be happy to advise you on what is going to help you get to where you need to be. Because if you just go on what you see on the training provider's website, it can sometimes be misleading. I'm not saying that it's inaccurate, but sometimes the way that they word it can kind of be misleading. And I know some of the online courses, you can go and you can spend a lot of money and a lot of your time doing the online courses, only to find out when you approach the BACP for membership that they will not give you membership, as they do not recognize that qualification. BACP is a great place to go and a great place to speak. But however, when you are going to the BACP, also keep in mind that there are BACP accredited courses and non-accredited courses, so that makes it a little bit more rocky. And I think we've discussed this in a previous podcast episode. I'll look that up and I'll put it into the show notes because I don't have it on hand. But you're okay with either. It's fine with either. It's just if it's not BACP accredited, it just means that the course provider has not paid the fee to the BACP for it to be accredited, but you are still able to practice after doing what is called a proficiency test for the BACP. So it can be really confusing, Rory.
It can be really confusing. And I know we're focusing on level 4 people moving from 3 to 4. The other thing I would say is that qualifications don't tell the whole story. It's possible for people to get qualifications that don't stack up. I was looking the other day, and I can do a master's degree in America in about 2 weeks. And and I get a nice certificate from the University of, I don't know, Wisconsin, which is, effectively, if you look at the address up, they're a trading estate on an industrial estate somewhere. I can do a PhD in the same way. So what I would say is, when you're looking for your tutors, just make sure that their qualifications are recognised, and there is an international bank of recognised qualifications. So I would do that, and I'd look for experience as well. I think that if someone's teaching counselling, I can remember the good old days. Ken, he's going back in time now.
Everything's in black and white as I'm thinking back there, Rory.
yeah, black and white and sepia, a nice sepia tone. And it doesn't happen now, but when I first started and I was invited to teach, I can only teach level 2 because I'd only been qualified for a year.
Wow.
And the awarding body wouldn't allow me to teach at practice level. Now, what happened was that as the years have gone, that kind of shift has gone. And now you can be qualified literally for a week and be allowed to teach on a level 4 course, which my view, I know, and I'm not disrespecting it. I know there'll be some of my former students listening saying, "Well, I'm just going to, I want to teach." Well, yeah, but you need to craft, and you need to be mentored, because it's far more than just teaching what's on the specification. It's about bringing your experience of being a therapist to the students, and it's that stuff that's hidden, that stuff that you can't really read in a book.
You know what, as you're saying that, Rory, I'm just realising that's exactly what the Counselling Study resource is that we provide. So if you haven't heard of the CSR, as we call it, to abbreviate the name Counselling Study Resource, Rory and I put together a resource which covers from level 2 right through to higher education with examples of assignments, but there's so much else in there, and it is that support, it is that outside of the syllabus information, it is having an active community of like-minded learners from all over the world to kind of bounce things off. It is, as you say, Rory, like learning a craft, and we get nothing but positive feedback from our members within that Counselling Study resource. And if you're interested in looking at that to support your studies, it's really easy to find. You just go to counsellingtutor.com. You can't miss it because it's on the front page right at the top, so that's worth having a look at. So there you go. There's the rocky ground of awarding bodies, Rory. And was there anything else? Because I kind of felt that I was jumping in there a bit.
And also, learning should be generally. I mean, sometimes it's not always easy learning counselling, because it's not like learning, say, bricklaying, where there's no kind of emotional involvement. And I don't want to be disrespectful for bricklayers. I'm sure they're very emotionally proud of the bricks they've laid, but it's a different approach. So just be, just get a sense, go from your gut feeling with a training provider, and ask about. One of the things I would say is Google. Google the training provider's name, Google the principles of the school, see what they say, see what comes up. It's about integrity. Our profession is about integrity, and if that isn't taught right at the beginning, then what you get is learners who are maybe skewed, or maybe maybe don't get the right impression of what our craft is. And that's so important, because we're working, everything we do is focused on the client. We're in the service of the client.
100%. And as part of that due diligence, as they say, in considering where you're going to place your business, because that's what you're doing at the end of the day when you're studying, you're paying for it and you're placing your business with a provider, go onto the Counselling Tutor Facebook group and ask, because it is likely that other people there, we've got over 7,000 members there, and they are with training providers, so they can give you feedback. And there's certainly many threads there speaking about this. In fact, that's why you picked it up today, Rory. So ask there and you will be answered, and you'll get some informed feedback from people that have used the various training providers. How do you find it? Go to Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, knock on the door, we will let you in. So moving away from that rocky road of training providers and awarding bodies, we move smoothly into EMDR. You see, I'm tripping over the acronym there, Rory. Give us a bit of a taster of what we can expect from today's theory with Rory.
Yeah, I've just been writing. I've just been writing a handout for this. I'll give the people a little insight. The people listening a little insight into how we do this. We record these a few weeks in advance, and sometimes I record the theory before we do the main preamble, which is what we're doing now. And I've been writing a super handout on it, and I've been struggling over the letters as well. EMDR, but then again, both myself and Ken are dyslexic, so there's no surprise. Yeah, it's a fascinating new therapy, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is becoming more and more recognised. And one of the things, Ken, it's becoming more acknowledged that people have it. I work on a regular basis with people who have various degrees of post-traumatic stress, and some of it is best dealt with a new therapy called EMDR, and it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And as I talk about in my Theory of the Rory section, it's rather like, on a very simplified level, moving your memories from the memory card on your camera to the hard drive on your computer, where it can be looked at in a different way. So I'm going to give you an overview of it, and I just want to be clear, it's a big piece of theory. So this is just a taster, just an overview, just to get people interested. And we'll put some links in the Facebook page, in the website, so that people can do their own research, Cam.
Well, without any further ado, let's dive straight in to that EMDR with Theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees Oakes.
Through the years, there's been lots of new and exciting developments in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, and one such development is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a recommended treatment now on the National Health Service for post-traumatic stress disorder. And just to remind us what post-traumatic stress disorder is, it is when someone replays thoughts and feelings of a past event that are traumatic. So, for instance, someone who's served in the forces may hear a firecracker going off or a firework going off, and then be catapulted back to a time when they were in a war zone being shot at, complete with all the thoughts and feelings of that event, fear of being killed, and the frightening, and in some cases the catapult back is so complete that people actually disassociate. They actually believe they're there. They may be stood in a street in Manchester, but actually they believe that they're in a desert in Afghanistan, in very extreme cases of post-traumatic stress. So this treatment was developed for trauma, and it's so effective, as I said, the NHS now recommend it as a first-line treatment for PTSD. It was developed by an American psychologist, Francine Shapiro, and interestingly enough, apparently she noticed that when people move their eyes in different directions, they processed information differently. And she developed the whole idea based on that observation. Now, effectively, what EDMR is a way of moving traumatic information from a part of the brain that gives us very high emotions and disassociates ourselves with the more cognitive part of the brain that can be more rational. So to understand how it works, we really need to understand that our brains some of our brains have got three separate bits. They're all joined together in the same mass, but we have three different parts that do fundamentally different jobs, and we're going to look at two parts of the brain: the limbic system, which is our emotional brain, and the cerebral cortex, which is, as my granddad used to refer to, the thinking cap. We've all heard of that good old northern term, put your thinking cap on, lad. Well, actually, we do have a thinking cap, and it's the cerebral cortex. It's the top half of the brain, which basically is where we do the analytical thinking. And it's different to the limbic system, that's the emotional brain, which does our emotional and in more intuitive thinking. So how does that work? Well, I'll give you an example. I'm sure a lot of you listening will have been across the road at some point, not looking, maybe looking at your phone, maybe checking Facebook. We're all guilty of it. And all of a sudden you've noticed that there's a car hurtling towards you. So you jump out of the way And a few seconds later, you think, oh my goodness, I was nearly run over, by a Rolls Royce or a Mercedes. Yeah. Well, there's two processes that are going on in the brain here. The first process is that your limbic system, through your eyes, will recognize the danger. There is a moving car. I am going to get run over and hurt by it. Yeah. The limbic system then operates the legs to move you out of the way, pop you back on the curb. And then a few milliseconds later, the cerebral cortex, the thinking cap, processes up and says, aha, that was a Mercedes that nearly ran me over. There's actually a little gap between the limbic system activating the defense mechanism, which is sometimes known as flight, fight, or freeze. We've all heard of that. And the thinking cap, which actually then rationalizes and says, this is why I'm on the curb now, and maybe I should not check my Facebook while I'm crossing the road. So EDMR works on moving thoughts from that part of the brain, the limbic system, to a more cerebral part of the brain where it can be looked at more rationally. So the analogy here is you come off holiday with a memory card full of pictures on your camera, you pop it into your computer and you move them across to the hard drive to keep them. And that's exactly how EDMR sees trauma. You're moving the traumatic thoughts from one part of the system to another, where you can look at those without the fear of the emotions getting in the way. And it's done by the use of eye movement. So when people's eyes are in certain positions, they're in a better position to move the thoughts into the part of the brain where they can be looked at. So EDMR really is a phased treatment. And I'm going to go through briefly the phases. So phase one is history and treatment planning. So this is about really building rapport and working with the client to see how the traumatic events have altered behaviours. So, I mean, an easy one here might be someone doesn't just want to walk down a certain street because they're attacked on that street, so they avoid going down it. And maybe that's something they want to look at. And also, at this point, the therapist is looking for specific targets for the therapy to work on. Events that created the problem, and also thoughts and feelings that are generated from the traumatic event. Now, the really good thing about EDMR, as far as I can see, is that it doesn't rely on the client replaying and going into detail about the traumatic events. And this is something that's come up quite a few times through the years when treating post-traumatic stress. When I first trained, the treatment really was to get people to explore in detail the event and then try to get them to think differently about it. But what happened was that research told us that all that happened was you were re-traumatizing clients. You know, you're literally taking people back into a battlefield again and saying, look, I know in the past that there was someone trying to shoot you, but actually you stood in the street in Manchester now. Well, that's not really helpful, because if people are literally feeling that they're going to be killed at any moment, they're not going to be in a position to be able to kind of look at that rationally. So the idea of EDMR is we don't look, or EDMR therapists don't look at the detail of the traumatic event. They look at specific targets. And those targets may be statements that the clients come away with from the event. So we'll take a couple of easy ones. I'm powerless, I'm useless, and it's my fault. Those are three that can kind of come up quite a lot in trauma work or working with clients who've been abused. So at this point, those would become the target thoughts or thoughts and the emotions around them to be moved from the memory card in the brain, where it's very emotional and very hard to deal with, to the memory card, to the hard drive in the brain, where it can be looked on rationally and somebody can look at what's going on in the context of the here and now. And we'll go into that a little later as we move through. So first of all, history and treatment planning, gaining an idea of what happened, gaining an idea of what the target of the therapy is going to be. Now in phase 2, there's preparation. Now, effectively, the therapist is taking the client on a journey partly into their past and into the trauma. So before that happens, the therapist equips the client with techniques to be able to self-manage themselves. So visualization techniques, breathing techniques, relaxation techniques. And we know that one of the triggers for stress, for trauma, is stress. If someone's stressed, then that thinking cap switches off and people can't make rational decisions. An example of that is when we lose our car keys. So, you're busy, you're on the last minute, you try and find your car keys, you can't find them, you're getting stressed, you've got a meeting, you've got to drop the kids off at school maybe. Stress. And eventually you sit down thinking, I'm just going to have to phone the school up and say I'm going to be late. And then you notice that the keys are next to your phone. And the reason for that is that when we're stressed, as I said before, the thinking part of our head, the thinking cap, actually starts to not be very effective. The middle brain is working very hard at finding ways that we could either run away, hide or freeze. And that's the nature of stress. So in this preparation phase in EDMR, it's really important that the client doesn't get into that stressful position, that they can manage themselves. Because if they can't, as they replay the target thoughts, they may very well be re-traumatized. So EDMR is a lot more than just moving people's eyes around. It's a really good preparation stage to allow the client to go back in to those intrusive thoughts and feelings in a way that they won't get re-traumatized or re-stressed. So phase 3 is assessment, and then the client chooses a statement that expresses a negative self-belief. So now equipped with understanding what they're going for, having a technique to manage any kind of residual traumatic feelings that are coming up, we're now into the work. And part of that is to go in and look at these thoughts and feelings in detail, and get the client to verbalize them. So it might be, negative cognitions, they call negative thinking. I'm worthless. I'm no good. I deserve to be hurt. They're all, pretty much standard vocabulary for people who've been abused. And they can be the ones that cause a lot of the difficulty as well. So now we're really engaging with the negative thoughts. Phase 4 is what's called desensitisation, and there's a scale used in this, and it's called a SUD rating. And the idea is the SUD rating really is how often the negative thoughts come back. And the idea is that as the treatment progresses, the SUD rating declines. Those negative thoughts and negative connotations and traumatic feelings start to reduce. So that should start to reduce. So start a rating scale quite immediately as the treatment starts to progress. Phase 5 is installation. And as I was producing this and looking at my notes, it really does feel like installing a new operating system. I recently upgraded a phone, and it said, do you want to upgrade your phone to the latest operating system and you'll have all these features? And I said, oh, yes, please. And I pressed it and the phone went offline for a bit, and then it came on and had all these exciting apps and things. And really, to use the analogy earlier when I talked about moving pictures from a memory card off your camera onto the hard drive of your computer, it is really exactly the same principle. And the goal here in installation is to increase the strength of the positive belief. So now we're moving into a more cognitive phase where clients are able to say, well, I'm 42, I'm not a child anymore. No one could do those things to me now that they did when I was a child. And to engage with that positivity and the reality of the situation. And it's also kind of like a desensitization phase, so that the person, the client who's being treated, doesn't feel like a child. Part of trauma is you're catapulted back through history, and that history plays back in the here and now. So someone who's 43 may feel like they're 5 with all the thoughts and feelings that went with being a 5-year-old. The installation phase in this therapy really allows people then to use the new app, which is the new thinking. So like I said, I upgraded my phone, and the new app allowed me to do different things. This is exactly the same route. Now, phase 6 is something called a body scan. So we're coming really to the ending phasing of the therapy, and it's basically about testing out if the positive thinking is working. And to do that, the therapist brings the target events, the things that they agreed to work on in the beginning, the I'm worthless, I'm useless, I have no control, and bring them to awareness, and then ask the client to apply the new upgrades, if you like. And as a consequence, the client can then see a real change in how their body reacts, because part of trauma is our body then, like when you step off the curb and not looking and the car comes towards you, the part of your brain takes control of your body to try and get you out of that situation. And the idea is that you're moving you're moving to a more executive control where you're using the thinking cap, and the thinking cap gives you better decisions and gives you a reality of it. So this is about testing it. And also, as this new kind of software's is working, this upgrade to your thinking is working, what can happen is the client can see that they're no longer shaking or feeling feared or flipping back into the history. They're in the here and now. And that's the target for reprocessing. Phase 7 is closure, and this ends every treatment session. And it's a case of helping someone get a case of equilibrium. So part of it is sending people back into the world not traumatized. That's the basis of it. And using techniques, to breathing techniques, maybe visualization techniques, to reset somebody so that they're okay to go out in the world. And then reevaluation. Now, reevaluation really happens at the end of EDMR, but it also happens at the beginning of every session. And it's about the therapist checking positive results. Now, when I read this, it kind of looks like a reinforcement behavior. So the client is reminded that things have changed. You know, part of therapy as a therapist is to help the client see the change. Because once they can see it, they can build on it. So they'd use the SUDS test, which is how often the negative and relapsing thinking came in. That should be declining. But they also use a validity of cognition test called a VOC. And that is a test to show how often the new software has been applied. You say to the client, how often did you do this? And the idea is that one scale drops, that of the reprocessed trauma drops, and that the new thinking kicks in. And that really is EDMR. You'll see that I've got a handout which just overviews it. It's a very big therapy, and also it's not one that I can go into detail, as you'll appreciate, in what is effectively a 20-minute segment in a podcast, but a new and exciting therapy.
Well, there you have it. The new kid on the block, Rory, EMDR. And if you want to get Rory's super handout that he spoke about in Theory with Rory, you can do that right now. You just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab. That's going to take you to all of our podcast back catalogue. Click on episode 43 and you can download that from right there in that show notes page. And that comes with all of our podcasts. Each podcast comes with a show notes page where we précis, summarise and kind of give you a bite-sized chunk of what we've covered in the podcast. So that's episode 43 and you can download Rory's superb handout.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. And now we're moving on to quite a contentious area in counselling, and one that when I taught had a lesson on its own about it, and that is challenging clients in the therapy room. Yeah. And I'm aware that our audience or the listener may not just be studying person-centered therapy. So when we're talking about challenge, different therapies would use challenge in different ways. And in 100%. Fact, Ken, I've got a lecture on this in the CSR. One of my lectures that I deliver as part of the CSR study group package, if you like, is that I do 2 live lectures a month during term time. And people can come in from their computer, from their phone, from their tablet, hear me lecture, and at the end we have a question and answer session. It's really good, isn't it, Ken? I really enjoy it.
It is, and they're so well attended, and the people that attend are always saying how much they got from that.
Yeah. So I'm giving one of my, I've got to admit this, I shouldn't really say this, but I'm going to say it, one of my favourite lectures, and that is challenge, because different modalities have different challenges. Now, some people would say that a person-centred therapist doesn't challenge. And I've got colleagues in the person-centred world that say, oh, no, that's verboten and forbidden. My view is that actually we challenge all the time. So if somebody says something to you and then you reflect it back, if that reflection is put in such a way that it actually puts in front of the client the contradictions of what they've said, that by its very nature is a challenge, isn't it?
It is. And this was a main chapter in the book I wrote. My book is called Basic Counselling Skills, A Student Guide. And it's about skills used as counsellors. And it's written specifically for learners. So if you're on a level 2, 3, 4, or you're at higher education level, this is a great book for you because it kind of traces down what the skills are and gives you examples of how they're used in a real life counselling situation. Albeit that a simulated session. This is as close as we can get and be ethical. And challenge was a challenging chapter of the book to write for me. It's chapter 8 of the book. And it's interesting because I am a person-centered therapist. I'm kind of, I like my roots of person-centered, as you will know, Rory, although yes. I am, of course, open to the new information from the other modalities, which I do use as well. But looking at challenge from a person-centered perspective, there is an argument that says challenge is very necessary in person-centered counselling because you're speaking about incongruence. When the person feels one way inside and they show something completely different outside, and the client needs to be in a position of incongruence for them to have come into therapy in the first place. So says Carl Rogers in his 6 conditions which are necessary and sufficient. That congruence needs to be challenged in some way, albeit through the eyes of the client themselves, through their own frame of reference, as you mentioned, Rory. You know, when they may say something, and I'll give you an example of that. They may say something along, "Oh, I'm broken. This is so hard. I don't feel that I can go on," and then a pause, and then the incongruence comes in. But what can you do? You just got to carry on. You know, life goes on. There's the incongruence. There it is. The client is saying, "This is what I feel inside, but hey ho, I've got to carry on." You can focus down on that. Yeah. And therein, there is the challenge where you can reflect back and say, you know, I hear you saying how broken it is and how difficult it is, how weighed down you are with that emotion. Yet I hear you saying you have to carry on through this. And that is challenge. That is challenging them, but it's a very gentle challenge and a very supportive challenge, and something I remember from my lessons with you when I was your student, Rory. One of the things you said is that with high challenge comes high support, and you cannot have high challenge without high support.
Absolutely. And I know there'll be people thinking, well, person-centered therapy, and I blame a lot on the internet for skewing a lot of Rogers' work. There's a great quote from Rogers. I think it's in A Way of Being. And he says, experience for me is the highest authority. It's not the parables or the work of Freud, but it's my experience, which I return to again and again in the process of becoming. And that's always the quote you find on super quotes or brainy quotes or in this case, inaccurate quotes. And there's another paragraph to that quote, and this is the key thing. He says, but my experience is infallible. It needs to be checked in new and primary ways. Now, if that isn't a clue to Carl Rogers saying, yes, I've got this phenomenological experience, but actually, is my experience real? Could it be distorted? And the challenge, and this new checking in new and primary ways is in fact really a therapist just saying to the client, you know, I mean, at a very simple level, you know, you may have a client who's saying, well, you know, I'm in counselling, but my partner isn't, and my partner's being abusive. And the challenge would be, well, okay, so you're doing some work here, but I wonder what work your partner's doing. To highlight the fact that unless someone engages in change, they most likely won't. And that's the reality of it. Also, in things like REBT or CBT, for those of you who are doing maybe integrative courses, we challenge your rational thinking. So your client may say, everybody's looking at me. So you might say, okay, well, why don't you try this technique when you're going shopping? Have a look in a shop window, look at the mannequin with the clothes on. And then instead of looking at the mannequin, look at the reflections in the window and just see if the people walking past you as you look in the window are looking at you. And that is very powerful. That is incredibly powerful because people can evidence it with their own eyes. That's a challenge. In TA, I know my good friend Bob Cook may very well say to someone within the contract, the therapy contract, okay, so what ego state were you in? Were you in a child ego state or a parent one? So there's challenge. And in Gestalt, Gestalt is based really on challenge to contact. So the whole of the therapy is based around it. So yeah, challenge is something that we do with clients. We do it with, as Ken says, high support. With high challenge comes high support, and I've got a super lecture on that. One of my real interests in practice, and have a look at Ken's super book as well, because he's got the examples on audio as well.
Yeah, and I guess with challenge, it can often be what our interpretation of that word challenge is, based on how we grew up and how we are with challenge. How are you listening to this now? How are you when somebody challenges you? What does it feel like for you? Because it's worth examining those feelings and maybe redefining the word challenge, because we're talking about challenge in a therapeutic environment. We're not talking about challenge as in confrontation. We're talking about challenge as in a tool or an aid or a skill that we can use in service of our client. And I think leaving challenge out, saying, I don't like challenge, I'm going to avoid it. There's something that we need to keep in mind here, and that is that the client can only go as far as we, the therapist, are willing to go, because we're going there with them. So if we're not willing to go there, how can we expect the client to go there? And I think by leaving challenge out, or ignoring challenge, or basing challenge on what our perception of that is, we're not doing the full service to that client.
I'd agree. But let's get that discussion going in the Facebook group.
Agreed.
Let's continue it. So when this podcast goes out, let's get a discussion thread going. Let's get other people's views on it. But I'm confident that challenge, and I've seen it work, really, really does help clients, but it has to be done with a high support, and it has to be done thoughtfully, not cack-handed, as my dad used to say. Agreed. It's a good northern term, that, cack-handed.
If you want to see Rory's lecture and you are a member of the Counselling Study Resource, you can get that on catch-up, because, of course, all the lectures, the bi-weekly lectures that Rory mentioned, are recorded and they're put into the lecture library. If you're not a member of Counselling Study Resource and you're interested in having a look at what that is all about, just go to counsellingtutor.com and you will find the link to the Counselling Study Resource from there, and you can go and have a look and see if that would feel like a fit for you to support you through your counselling studies. So it kind of brings us to the end, Rory, I guess.
Yeah, it is. We'd love to have you on board. We're very appreciative of all the people who've left us 5-star reviews on iTunes. So if you like what you hear, and you want to put a review on iTunes, we'd be delighted to have that, because it really does make our day. And keep our spirits up, doesn't it, Ken?
It does. It does. We speak about them, we read all of them, and we're very grateful for all of your feedback. And as Rory says, those 5-star reviews. We like 5-star reviews very, very much. I have to say that. But we like honest reviews more. Yeah. So just be honest in how that fits for you. And if that just so happens to be a 5-star, then what can we do, Rory? Well, that's episode 43 for you, starting off with awarding bodies, learning providers, going into theory with Rory with EMDR, and of course ending off with that discussion on challenge. Hopefully that has been useful for you, because that is the sole reason why Rory and I are here.
Absolutely. And as we end episode 43, as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.